So when we talk about what we've done thus far, we've used underglaze. The name underglaze means it goes under glaze. The only experience you have had thus far with glaze is this clear glaze, okay? And if you think about it, the color, when you paint it over the top of your underglaze, it is going bye-bye. You're seeing a blue color that I am telling you is going to be clear. So if you think about it, the color in the jar is not at all what it actually looks like. That is going to be the exact same rule for all the glazes I'm going to show you today. So writing down the name that you're using, writing down the series that name is in is going to be very important because I am not a magician. I can't look at your, let's say, malachite, which is a color. It's kind of a green, has a lot of different, movement and black and different colors in it. But when I look at that, it may be red in the jar. So, you have to know what color you're using. I cannot just magically tell you, okay? So, the difference between underglaze is like pigmented slip. You can mix it, match it. It can go anywhere. It could even go on the bottom, not that we want that to happen. Glaze is a glass coating. So when it gets to those really high temperatures, like 1800, 2000 degrees, and then it starts to cool down, it's going to start to solidify and become hardened, like molten hardening, and then it's going to stick to wherever it's touching. So if you don't wipe the bottom, it's going to stick to the kiln. So we're going to talk a little bit about dry footing. We're going to talk about do's and don'ts of layering, what glazes to use. If you have a textured area, what glazes not to use. If you don't have texture. And then I'm going to explain the 7 different series of glazes that we have. This is a decorative element that we use to add color. We use to add a shine to make it finished and have that glass coating. Sometimes it can be food safe. Sometimes it cannot be. So I'm going to show you the symbols on how to read your glaze bottles if for some reason you wanted to drink out of yours. Like Angel did a little coffee mug. She actually may want to pick a glaze that is suitable to drink out of, okay? So first thing to go over, you're going to see a few different types of glazes today. You're going to see some that are matte. Matte means that they're smooth. They're not really shiny. They're more of like that natural, just kind of like, I don't want to say dull, but they do have more of like that natural dull. Whereas the gloss is going to be super high sheen, very reflective, and typically look more like what you would think of a traditional glaze. So what I see students ask all the time, they may go over to the glazing chart and find a really cool matte color, okay? And they're going to be like, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to put the clear glaze over it. And I'm like, no, you're not. Because that is not how it was meant to work. What you see is what you get. If it is a matte glaze over there, that is meant to be a matte glaze. So you're not going to just change it up by adding clear glaze over it, okay? So it doesn't work in the same way that underglaze does. Here's just a little sample showing you on a tile where they chose to leave the color matte, where they chose to add that shiny finish. The next two set of words that I want to talk about are opaque, which means solid, not see-through. It's going to be very dark, milky, cloudier, even some words that can be used to describe it, versus something that is polar opposite of that, which is transparent. Transparent is translucent, it is see-through, but how and what did they use to get that color underneath? The transparent blue glaze. How do you guys think they achieved that? Yes? Sgraffito. So they definitely carved the cavities in while the clay was still leather hard. But they used underglaze. They used underglaze while the clay was still... Underglaze can be used when it's greenware or after it's been fired, bisqueware. So they used underglaze, but then they picked a transparent glaze. So it doesn't mean that it's clear necessarily, but it is a tinted color that has that transparent quality. So we have several different glazes over there. It is called the Opalescent Series number 3. So if you look above the create sign, I'll walk over here. If you look above the create sign, you'll see series number 3, Opalescent, and these are any of the ones that you see with a purple dot. Any of the glazes with the purple dot are going to be transparent or semi-transparent, meaning that you can see underneath them, at least to some degree. The darker the color, obviously the less likely you're going to be able to see underglaze. So if some of you were not able to add underglaze or add like really little details like L's, I'm totally making this up, but let's say you wanted to do like a little scene inside of like the windows or whatever. You could do that with underglaze and then pick a semi-transparent to go over it if you wanted to. It's not like too late for that. So that would be an appropriate time to use a transparent glaze, and then how you use underglaze with it. Okay, so we've gone over underglaze, so I'm going to kind of skip over that. Okay, your vessels that have all been fired would really benefit from just a little washing. So basically, before you glaze them, I noticed when I was getting them out of the kiln, some of you still had like lots of like crumbs or broken off pieces, or if you used any armature paper inside of your piece while it was being fired, we want to rinse that out. So just kind of splash some water. You can put water in it, dump it out, and then while you're picking your glazes, it'll just dry out nice and neat for you. So you can kind of keep those out to the side. And then if you want to wipe anything off, like let's say you made a mistake, or you're like, I picked the wrong color, or something just came into your mind and you're like, I don't like this, it is also water soluble. You can wipe that off with a sponge. You can bathe it and completely start fresh if you'd like. We obviously don't like when you do that because we don't want to waste the glaze, but sometimes it's necessary, so you absolutely can do that. A few different ways to apply the glaze. Traditionally, in college, I would say 95% of the time I would dunk them into a big trash can of glaze. That is a very expensive method, and you usually get very limited color palettes. We traditionally in here would recommend that you use a really nice soft fat brush. Other ways that you can add different like styles or techniques would be sponging it on. So if you want kind of like that spongy effect, you could use a sponge. You could splatter paint using a toothbrush or your finger, and kind of create kind of like those splatter looks. Various sizes of brushes. So if you're trying to get something super, super detailed, then please make sure you use a small brush. If you're using a really small brush on a wide surface area, it's going to take you way longer, so size up. And then we also have some things where you can like use masking tape to kind of section off areas if you're trying to like paint on a pattern that you could use. I'm not going to like really get into it right now, but there's some like wax resist, paper resist that you can also use to kind of avoid an area until you're ready to layer over it. Let's see. This is a huge one. This is one of the number one things that we need to really make sure that you guys are doing a good job at. It is called dry footing. When you look at the anatomy of a vessel, we've talked about this. We have the lip at the top, and then we have the neck, and then we have the belly of the vessel, and then the bottom is called the foot. So when I say dry foot, that just means that you're wiping it off completely. I will tell you, probably 30% of the tiles, people did not wipe the bottom off. And it just, one, it slows us down. We typically will say we're not going to fire them if there's glaze on the bottom. Now, I probably am a little too nice. I'll go get a sponge, and like some of the times we'll wipe it down. Other times, if it's really bad, I will just leave it back there, and a student's like, I never got my piece. Like, yeah, it's back there because there's glaze everywhere. This is what happens and why we cannot glaze the bottom. So what happens is, you can see here the blue glaze basically ran down the sides of the vessel and flowed onto the fire brick. And then here where you see that dark ring, that's where we actually had to detach the piece from the kiln shelf because the glaze flowed. It can sometimes happen even if you have a dry foot. There are certain series of glazes back there that just really like to run. Miss Osborne just made these for her house. She used the Element series and then she used a metallic. The metallics tend to run a lot, especially when they're on like a vertical orientation like your vessels. The glaze is running down, and so they tend to like to pool, and they run down towards the bottom. And so sometimes when you use like a darker color or you use one of these metallics, you want to stop about 1/4 of an inch from the actual bottom so that way you ensure that it does not fuse to the kiln. And then obviously just triple check that the bottom doesn't have glaze on it for me, okay? So that's called dry footing. So we are very fortunate. We have lots of kilns here in this building. Back here in this room, we have 2 electric kilns. We can program those. They will run overnight. And great. Kind of start them and then out of sight, out of mind. In the other room, in the C hallway, we have 2 gas kilns. We have 1 gas kiln, which looks like this kind of like giant pizza oven where you actually, like Miss Osborne and I will get inside the kiln. You guys will hand us pieces. We can fire a significant amount more pieces by doing it in there. So for our houses, we're gonna try to get all of them fired before Thanksgiving break into that big gas kiln, or let them dry and then we'll fire them right when we get back. That one has to manually be ramped. You manually have to increase the heat throughout the day. You hear, if you've ever been in C104 or C103, when it's going, you may hear loud noises because the alarm likes to go off when it's ready for the next step. And then we also have a raku kiln, not raccoon, but a raku kiln in the other hallway too. So we have about 6 kilns, so a really good amount. Okay. This doesn't really affect us right now, but just so you know, glazes are gonna look different on different colors of clay, different clay bodies. So there's like red clay, porcelain, we have white clay, which is what we're using, the earthenware. And the colors, you can tell based on the actual tiles, you can see this like raised area is red, and how that color is gonna look drastically different on red than it does on a white clay. So just keep that in mind. I think all the ones that we have over there are on white clay, and then any of the glazes that are our high firing glazes, we've kind of hid those, and Miss Osborne will get those out when you're like in ceramics 2 and 3. Okay, so just procedurally, you guys have already experienced this, so I'm not gonna go over it a whole lot, but we know that when we create a piece and it needs to get bone dry, it's gonna go into the kiln room, into the drying cabinet. When you're done glazing, please do not leave your piece in your locker. Don't leave it on the back counter. But when you go back into the kiln room, you need to turn left in the kiln room, and there is a to be fired for glazeware, okay? That's where you need to put your pieces. I know every year that there's somebody that's like, I don't see my piece, it didn't get fired. And I'm like, well, where is it? It's either in their locker or it's like on the back counter where we put things when they come out of the kiln. So I don't want to have that responsibility as well as everything else. So when you're done glazing, I will know it's done glazing and ready to be fired when it's in the correct location, okay? All right. This is just kind of what it could look like when we start to load the kiln. And I know this is like very much behind the scenes because you guys don't load the kilns. We have kiln furniture and kiln posts. So they elevate each next flat surface or tier for where we can put more pieces. So the reason we give you guys height requirements is because we want to try to fire as many pieces as we can. And our tallest still is 10 inches, which is why we usually say no taller than 9 inches. Gives us about an inch of wiggle room. And then we're able to fit as many things down here on the bottom level before we raise up the next like big fire brick. And so that's just kind of what it looks like. The first firing, you can put as many things in there as you want and nestle them in. Second firing, once you have glaze on your pieces, nothing can touch, or they will cling together and make a big giant centipede of a project, and stick to the kiln. Okay, so when we talk about firing, I think this is not something that I'm gonna like necessarily test you over, but it's definitely something that you're going to run into when you're picking your glazes, is knowing the temperature of the kiln and how high we're firing your pieces to. So we are using low fire glazes. which means that we are firing at a cone 05. You're gonna see some glazes when we look at the element series later on today that say cone 06. Cone 05, cone 06 are within, like, I don't even know, like probably, they're very similar in terms of heating it up. One may get to 2000, whereas the other one's at 1955. They're very comparable, so when the glaze says cone 06, that is fine. It can be fired in a cone 05 firing. So what is a cone? So it's a pyrometric cone that basically goes into the kiln, and there's different ways that we use it, but it basically is helping us gauge how successful the firing was, how hot the temperature got. It's just a way for us to like read to make sure that we had a successful firing. We don't put these in all of them, especially our electric kilns, because we have programs and we can read like where something went wrong. If it shut down in the middle of the night, we know like what temperature it shut down, and we're usually able to problem solve and kick it back on to where we need it to be. The cones are more used in our manual or big gas kiln because that everything we have to manually do ourselves. So this is just a way for us to make sure that we are reading it accurately and make sure that it gets to the appropriate temperature. So the cone will start fully up and down, and then if we have a successful firing, you'll see that it's bent all the way over. If it's like only partial, that means that it wasn't a fully mature firing. So you won't get tested over that, but I just wanted to share that with you. Here's some of the other cones. So we work with a low fire glaze, which we're right here in this realm. So very minimal temperature difference here. And then as you get into upper level classes, you may start to use more of the high firing glazes. High firing means the temperature is just hotter, okay? All right. You want to pick a good color scheme. You want it to be harmonious. You want it to show unity. You don't want these like drastic opposite colors that just like don't look good together. And I think a lot of you, like being in multiple art classes or just having a good eye for design, are innately gonna do that really well. But I'm here, use my expertise to ask before you do it if you're not sure. And I will tell you if I think it looks good or not. Always, always, always shake the bottle before you use it. They're going to have like chunky parts at the bottom and maybe some water that's leveled off at the top. And you need to hear that it sounds like creamy soup. Now, this happened in Miss Osborne's class yesterday. Every year we say, make sure the lid's on. Every year somebody doesn't do that and they end up wearing the glaze. Yesterday it happened to be a sweet little girl and she was wearing the glaze. These bottles are $45 to $50. We have 150 colors. That is a ton of money. So one, we don't want to waste it, but two, I don't want you to have to go through the rest of your day covered in glaze. So what happens is when people open the bottles, they may get really bad like gunk buildup around the rim and they don't take the time to wipe it off. And so when they go to shut it, it gets like a little bit off kilter. And then when they go and shake it, it doesn't line up and glaze gets out. Or somebody may have literally not screwed it on, they just put it back and then people shake it because they are listening to what you're supposed to do and then they end up wearing it. One year I had a student, he sat right here. He was using the color malachite, it's like a green, and shook it up and it went up his nose, up his eyes, all over his phone, like the ceiling, everywhere. And like, I remember they did one of these numbers and like you could just see the whites of their eyes. It was a ginormous mess. Please don't let that happen to you. The only reason I'm really reiterating it is because we were just giggling. It happened yesterday, okay? So it happens. If your glaze is really chunky and hard, let me know. I will hydrate it for you. Please do not do it yourself. Not that I don't trust you, but sometimes people add too much water and then it just really like ruins what consistency we're going for. Okay, now I'm ready to show you this and then I'm going to show you the series and you guys will start picking your colors. Okay, experiment. Yes, we love experimenting. That's how you're going to see like what works well together and what doesn't. But there are things that don't work well together and there are things that happen. I will tell you, you may pick a really awesome like combination of glazes and then you try to do it again and again and it will never quite be the same. It all depends on like, you know, the placement in the kiln. Was it next to the blower? Was it next to the really like hot heat source? or was it down below? Maybe it didn't get mature enough, or maybe you didn't layer it exactly the way you did the first time. It's just something that's like never going to be the same. So like, don't let it stress you out, because there are these like imperfections and like beauty to glaze. So one thing, layer one glaze over another. You can do this, but you want to make sure that it's in the same series, same family, okay? Because if it's not, then most of the cross series don't work well together. So you're not going to want to take an LG, which I'll explain that in a minute, liquid gloss, and mix it with an element. Those are not going to work well together. They are meant to do different things. But if you wanted to experiment with layering two elements, there's a whole system in place for that type of experimentation. One thing to notice, I talked about it a little bit when I showed you Miss Osborne's metallic color that can sometimes run. That is kind of what happened here. You have this really dark, rich color next to this really light color of different families, and it started to bleed into it. So this wasn't like they were splatter painting and trying to get that drip effect. That was more of like the color ran. That can happen, okay? And then the cabinets back here. Just to show you how they're all organized. Every single thing is organized by color. So when you go back here, you're gonna see a red section, a purple section, a brown section, and a metallic section. But there is a caveat to that. Element series, those are not color coordinated. The elements are their own special series that have their own shelves. So this matters because Osborne and I have a system that we know when we go back there, if we don't see it, that means we don't have it. Not that somebody put it in the wrong spot. So we really need you guys to respect that. Also, like the clear glazes and the under glazes have their own homes, right? So when you're walking back here, everything's color coordinated except for these two cabinets against this wall. It says Element Series Glazes and the bottle says Elements on it, okay? That's where those go. And then they all have like their own little homes and compartments that you'll keep them in. Okay, last little thing before I walk over there and show you the board. So glazes are not meant to just be like a solid color. Like they are meant to break and pool. So when you see the word pool, like imagine being in a swimming pool. You're inside these like little like cavities or areas that you apply texture to, and the glaze is pooling up, meaning that it gets darker in there. It looks like there's depth. Where breaking is more on the untextured surfaces where the color starts to pull apart or break. So even though this student did 3 layers, it looks really light right there because there's no texture right there. So if you burnished and burnished and burnished, you may not want to pick this super textural glaze because that was never the intent of that section of your piece anyway. Does that make sense? So thinking about breaking and pooling, this certain series will each handle the way that it breaks and pools a little bit differently. So here's a great example of this one color that they used. The areas where it's breaking is definitely pulling more of like that sandy, like warmth color, whereas inside the cavities, you're getting more of that blue. So glaze is really awesome in this sense. It's not just like underglaze with like a solid color. It's meant to have these variations to it, okay? I told you I would go over what it looks like. So if you're somebody in here that has to be able to drink or eat from something that you make, you're going to want to make sure that the label on your glaze says dinnerware safe. And then if it's not, make sure that you don't use that if you're planning on eating or drinking out of it. We will glaze the inside of our vessels. We want them to be waterproof, especially if you did a vase. You want it to be able to hold water and be waterproof and glossy on the inside as well. Okay. So I'm going to go over here now, and please make sure that you're using these resources. Miss Osborne spent a lot of time on this. I cannot take credit for this at all. This was her brainchild. So right now, if we look or below the create sign, we have series 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. They have posters above them because we want you to read the information. I don't expect you to remember exactly what I'm telling you right now. But I do expect you to come back and use this wall as a resource and make sure that you understand what it's doing. Thank you. You can just set them right there for me. Perfect. Okay, so the first one, number 1, corresponds right here on the board. It says LG Liquid Gloss Glaze, and it has a number 1. So in that column, these are all the LG colors. What these are going to do, they're going to be smooth and glossy. It says they are great for enhancing texture, vibrant colors, glossy surfaces, best on white clay. So the LG are going to be great for you to use. 3 layers are required, okay? You're going to be doing a lot less glazing with your coil vessels than your tiles, because before you had to do 3 layers of underglaze and 3 layers of glaze. But the glaze is the glaze, so you're doing 3 layers of that color and you're done. The next one, number 2, is called Amico F Series, and these are low fire glazes, which are great for us because that's what we're using. They're semi-opaque and fire with a high gloss. Colors are more intense and brilliant than those of many other glazes. So this one is a little bit smaller series. We have gray, a really pretty navy blue, a really intense orange, and then one of my personal favorites is Celadon. It's a new one that we have. It's that really pretty, like kind of like robin's egg blue, but a little bit more green to it. Then we have Series 3, which is opalescent, which I've already talked about. Those are going to be your semi-transparent. They are really great for breaking and pooling. So if you have a lot of texture, you may want to go to the opalescent series, so that way you can see the texture that you purposely put there. If you were to use a lot of element on a piece that's super, super textural, it may hide some of it, or it may not be as noticeable because they're more textural glazes. Opalescent, those are the ones with the purple dots. Number 4, these are your spectrum colors, and for that we have the metallic. So golden halo, we have like a green mirror, green patina, like a wrought iron color. Some of these are more matte. They are not food safe, okay? But if you're looking for a metallic color, that's gonna be the series you're gonna wanna look at. Then we have number 5. These are your foundations, or some of the brands are stroke and coat is what they're called. These are great for skin tones. We always call one of them like white girl white. There's like birthday suit, dry champagne, like a really pretty pink called Pinkadot. Those are going to be really good for those like neutral tones. Number 6, this is kind of like, I don't know, the Mac Daddy of the glazes. There are so many options. What you see up here is by far the biggest section on our glaze board, but there's also a whole nother world to these that a lot of times people don't utilize. There is a QR code up here, and I will show you on the screen how to find it yourself. But it will tell you if you layer 2 layers of one element over 2 layers of another, it will get you something a little bit more experimental. So it kind of looks like tie-dye, or like just a lot of colors like kind of blending into each other. They do some really cool things, and I will say a lot of my students did kind of lean into that today. But the Element series are just really good with a wide range of variety. There's just a lot of like colors within one color. And then the very last one that we have is cobblestone. So we have some glazes that look like cobblestone. There is a black cobblestone and there is a white cobblestone, and it says apply over another glaze. So you could pick literally any glaze and do 2 or 3 layers of that, and then do 2 layers of cobblestone over the top of it, and it will give you this really cool like dotted cobblestone look. We also have crackles. So when you fire this, you may not notice the crackles right away, but then we rub ink into it and you get kind of that aged, like broken look. We have a green tea, white, and sea green, and then you would rub the India ink into the cracks to kind of bring that to life. Okay, last thing I'm gonna show you, and then I promise I'm done talking. So I wanna show you how to get to the combination on how to look at the elements. So what you will do is you will go to makeocolors.com, and I'm actually going to take you like straight to the beginning so that way you know exactly how to find this. So when you go to Mako, makocolors.com, you're going to go up here and toggle on where it says color, and then you're going to go to glaze combinations. So it'll bring you here. If you don't want to find it on your computer, then you can use the QR code and it'll take you right there. Okay, so this is where I said it is going to matter if you know the difference between the different firing temperatures. So on here, the only one that you guys are able to do is cone 06. So if you click cone 06, and then we are using the Element series, and then we do not offer every single color that they have, so I would be familiar with what element colors we do have. One that I'm going to show you today is one of my favorites. It's a stunning neutral. It's called Oyster Shell. So I'm going to click on Oyster Shell, and now it's going to populate, and I apologize, the colors are way better on my screen than up here, but it's showing you, like let's say you wanted this kind of like periwinkle blue. What you would do is you would do 2 layers of oyster shell over 2 layers of rain cloud. So you would always start with this bottom one first, 2 layers of rain cloud, which looks like this, and then you would end with 2 layers of oyster shell, and you would get something relatively like this. So there are lots of options. There's some that are just like super surprising when you look at how you layer them. And then typically, like if you want to use multiple colors, this would be great for like a body, but then like you could always pull one of these other two as like an accent color too, and they would go together pretty well. Okay? The end.